Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Build Computers. Today we're going to be taking a look at the MSI X470 Gaming Pro, which is a very modestly priced gaming motherboard for AMD Series 2 Ryzen. So let's take a look. So let's kick off this review with just a quick visual overlook of the bells and whistles of the board, as I like to call them. And that mainly circulates around RGB. Now, the last board that I reviewed was also an MSI. It was more or less the Intel equivalent of this, where it was their sort of low-level top chipset board, which is the same deal here. This is a £130 motherboard, but it has the X470 chipset in it. Now, this board it's aimed at gamers, unlike the Z390A Pro that I looked at the last time, that was sort of an anti-gamer board. It was a high functionality board, but with no gaming features like RGB and stuff like that. This one does have the gaming label on it, and it does have a tiny bit of RGB. We've got an RGB header down here and another one hidden just down here. That's just next to the fan header there. It's just 12-volt analog RGB strip headers with no ability to switch those into 5-volt mode or anything like that. And there's no digital RGB there, which is, it's just okay, really. I wouldn't pick this as an RGB controller at all. You're going to want to use a third-party controller like an NZXT Hue or something like that. We do have the MSI Mystic Light on the back, which is this row of LEDs here. However, the Mystic Light is pants, is crap. You'll get a token gesture glow out of this, not really anything more. I wouldn't rely on this thing for illuminating the computer. The audio separation line doesn't light up either. So yeah, again, this isn't really the board if you want to do a big RGB setup. But then likewise, again, if you're amongst the crowd who don't like RGB or aren't even bothered about RGB, then obviously this is fine and dandy with you. You can have a nice smart looking board with good functionality and not have all the lighty up rainbow flashy bits. And as I say, that's some people's cup of tea. But, it's kind of interesting to note that, there have been some headlines lately that say RGB is dead. And I have seen, I wouldn't say that RGB is dead, but we are seeing quite a step back with the current generation of boards where they're no longer putting on RGB for the sake of RGB. So it's just interesting to see the way that trend seems to be fading a little bit at the moment. It might get a second resurgence, and definitely people are still building with RGB, but there's definitely less of a focus of it on the current generation boards. You've got to go up to the high end to really see the RGB stuff come into it again. Interesting. So, main features, X470 chipset for Gen 2 Ryzen, which is, as of recording this video, we're expecting Gen 3 soon TM. So, this is kind of late in the game. However, because of the socket AM4 life cycle, when Gen 3 Ryzen comes out, I am absolutely sure that you'll be able to do a BIOS update on one of these and drop a Gen 3 Ryzen into it. So that doesn't write off this board entirely. However, do remember that if you're watching this after Gen 3 Ryzen has been released, you will need to do a BIOS update on this motherboard before you drop a Gen 3 Ryzen into it. So watch out if you're buying this with a Gen 3. I have other videos doing repair where I've demonstrated purchasing a cheap AMD CPU to use as a BIOS upgrading CPU. That brings us on to just sort of general BIOS utility. Because it's an MSI board, there's no dual BIOS or anything like that, and this one is too low end to have any real BIOS recovery. So if you do a lot of messing about with BIOSes and overclocking and stuff, if you accidentally brick this motherboard, then you've basically had it. So be careful with that. You do have a clear CMOS button down here though, which is nice, and we've got the token gesture diagnostic LEDs up here, which is also nice. It's also worth noting that really, having made those criticisms about the BIOS setup, not a lot of motherboards actually have this kind of recovery anyway. But if you buy any Gigabyte board, it has dual BIOS. So make of that what you will. Let's move on. So the main thing I usually point out at the start is CPU vCore. So that is the power system for your CPU, arguably one of the most important sections of the board. So that it will be the row of MOSFETs that's underneath this heatsink here. Now, this board has, visually, it has an 8+2 setup. So you can see we've got 8 inductors there. that will be fed in through from the MOSFETs under the heatsink, and there's another 2 on the side there. However, the previous iteration of this board, which was a Gaming Plus, it got blasted by some of the high-end websites like Adamant, because they actually discovered that this V-Core setup is not an 8+2. MSI claim it to be an 11-phase setup. It's got 8 physical phases, and it's actually being driven as 2 pairs of 4. So arguably, it's actually a 4-phase setup. Now, what this means is that you have a lot of current handling for delivering a lot of power to the CPU, because you've got lots of MOSFETs handling that switching. However, because of the small number of useful phases, it means that the motherboard is less capable of handling the power hammering on and off, because when your CPU bangs onto load and the power system has to then react to that, more phases equals a more stable power supply that can react faster and more accurately with less ripple. Now, that is going to be important if you're going to be overclocking the nuts off of your CPU. And for a board like this that visually has fairly beefy looking V-Core, it's disappointing to know that it doesn't actually have a lot of usable V-Core. However, for the average gamer who will only ever do a modest overclock just to get into like the 4 GHz club or whatever, this isn't really a problem. You know, you can criticize this and you can say, oh, that's bad, that's not what it should be and stuff like that. But in the real world, it doesn't really make a massive difference. So this is visually impressive, technically not very impressive, but in the real world, it's fine. Let's move on. DRAM, DDR4, obviously. They've got dual latching connectors on here. They're not reinforced or anything, which is a shame. I would like to see the reinforcement like you can see on this PCI Express slot here. I would like to see that as standard on memory slots, because when you're putting in your memory modules, the board does bend and flex a bit. It's really nice to have that reinforcement there just for that confidence in the board. However, personally, I've never ever seen one of these break before. So it's arguable how much it actually matters. So just a thought. Nothing more to say about that. It's 4 DDR slots. That's what you get. And also, just to illustrate that point a little bit further, if I turn the board over, this is the back of the DDR slots, and like these anchor points aren't soldered. Like if I look at the PCI Express slots, those anchors are soldered onto the board. Even on the the 1X slots aren't, but even on these ones that aren't reinforced, those anchors are soldered. But these guys, it's just held in on the pins alone. It's just, it could be better. That's my beef with that. It's not that it's terrible, but it could be better very easily. So then moving around, X470 chipset as mentioned. The PCI Express setup down here, we've got 3 16 length slots. This one is obviously a full fat 16 length. These two are pinned for 8 times. I'm not sure whether the lower one is going to be a 4 times or not. It may or it may not be. They have not mentioned on the silk screen of the board whether it is or not. It doesn't particularly matter because, to be honest, again, unless you're running a really bonkers computer, in which case you'll have a more expensive board than this anyway, you're not going to be running more than 2 graphics cards, absolute tops, in which case you're not really going to care about that bottom slot anyway. So these guys are absolutely fine. And again, the top one is reinforced, so you can run a nice big heavy graphics card in there with confidence. I have seen these break before, but they're really tough, so you've got to give them some proper abuse to actually break one. We've also got a nice decent selection of a couple of PCI Express 2-lane slots as well, so you can put in a couple of extra add-on cards, no problems there. So moving around to other stuff, audio circuit. Modest audio circuit is good, functional. That's it. Doesn't have any utility. We've got a nice bank of 8 filter caps on there, which is good. The cheap boards you'll see have just got 6 or even 4 on the really low end boards. So having 8 ESR caps down there is quite nice. There's no other real utility with the audio. There's no switching in to plumb the low noise stuff to the front ports, and likewise there's no DAC up or anything like that. However, these again are very niche features that most people are not particularly bothered about. You'll get decent audio out of this, don't worry about that. And it also does have digital output on it as well, which is a nice touch. So if you are bothered about getting good quality sound out, then run a digital output to a digital receiver, and then you can use an external DAC for that. And that is how you're going to get decent audio out of your computer if you do happen to have a very exotic set of speakers. And by that, I mean like, you know, proper good brand hi-fi speakers, not computer speakers. Computer speakers are all terrible. Cool. Moving around, ports along the bottom. As aforementioned at the beginning of the video, we've got a token gesture RGB header strip down there. That's just an analog one, so it just does basic RGB for wash lighting. It's not going to do sequencing or anything like that. It's not addressable. We also have, for some reason or other, we've got some legacy ports there. We've got a 9-pin serial COM port, and we've got the LPT printer port down there as well for parallel stuff. So those are present if you want to use them for some strange reason. We've also got dual USB 2 headers and dual USB 3 headers, which is quite interesting. And that brings me around to one of the other very interesting features of this board is it has up to 16 USB ports on it, which is pretty impressive, with the 4 USB 2s there, the 4 USB 3s, and another 8 USBs on the back with 2, 4, 6, 8. These ones are USB 2, however, that's fine. You don't, you know, not everything is USB 3. You can have a huge number of peripherals hooked up to this thing. But that does come at the price that inexplicably this board doesn't have USB-C on it. It does have a USB 3.1 controller on it. 2 of those ports at the back are USB 3.1. But they opted to omit a USB-C type connector on the back or any USB-C headers on the board. Now, USB-C is still quite a niche connector, so that's not really a showstopper. But for a current generation board with an X470 chipset, not to have that seems really strange to me. But that's fine. We'll survive. To be honest, I don't think we're going to be seeing USB-C until at least the next generation anyway. But we're not going to see it until everyone's got it. It's a chicken and egg scenario, so kind of strange. What else have we got? Fan connectors. We've got 6 fan connectors. We've got 2 here. We've got 2 here. And then we've got 2 CPU ones here. This one being labeled as a pump connector, but it's just a fan connector. So not a huge amount of fan connectivity on this board. 6 is just sort of the norm. Some of the other boards have got 7 or even 8 these days. And to be honest, I'm not too fussed about that because in the majority of cases, if you're running a lot of fans in your computer, you probably have some kind of fan hub or fan controller anyway. And so six fan headers here. That's going to give you plenty. So you can be running dual fans on your CPU. You can be running 1 at the back, 1 at the top, and a couple at the front. And that would give you a case full of fans, basically. So 6 is absolutely fine. I've got no beef with that. Other connectivity, we've also got 2 M2 ports, which is nice. One of them is low and 80mm, and the other is high and I believe 100. So that is fine. And we've got the obligatory SATA 6 port, SATA 3. Let me try one more time. 6 SATA 3 ports. There we go. We got there in the end. So that is there as well. And that more or less concludes the tour of this board. So yeah, interesting board. The price of this board comes in, as of recording this, at about 130 quid, which is reasonably priced for what I would call a quality build. And for those of you who haven't heard me use that term before, I stole it from Dark Souls. And the quality build basically means a good all-rounder, where it's not super specialized toward anything in particular. It's just an all-rounder motherboard that is modestly priced and quite accessible and quite easy to use by all. A cheaper board, you can get cheaper X470 boards, and likewise, as per usual, the X470 boards will scale all the way up to 150, 200, 300, and probably to 400 quid or even more as well. But at 130, this is the kind of board that you'd actually want to buy for a decent, well-rounded computer. But it does face stiff competition from the Gigabyte equivalent. The Gigabyte equivalent to this board it costs about, again, as of recording this, it's about £10 more expensive. But for that, you get a visually more gaming oriented board with a bit more lights and bells and whistles on it. And that, of course, it comes with the SSD heatsink on it as well, which is not mandatory, but it's there, and it also has a more exotic V-Core setup on it and is generally a more impressive looking board for only another £7 on Amazon as of this morning. So, and that is kind of the difference really, is that this board feels like a slightly exotic bottom end X470 board, whereas it's priced to go against a cheap high-end board, if you see what I mean. Because that Gigabyte that I mentioned looks like it should be costing like £150, but actually costs 130. And this board looks like it should be costing about £100, but actually costs 130. Make of that what you will. I don't think it's a bad board, and if you've bought one of these, I think you'll do absolutely fine with it, and I wouldn't be at all worried. Let's install it in something, fire it up, and have a look at the BIOS and just the other functionality of it. And so that's a confirmed on the lower PCI slot being 4x as well, because if you look, this one's an 8 times, and you can see that we have signal traces with filter caps coming off of that top row and mid row of pins there. But the lower one, the actual signal traces are only hooked up to halfway out, and the other half of those pins there are not connected. So yeah, that's a 4x slot. Okay, right, we're all set. So, things of note, we've got a Rathspire cooler on here because I've dropped in a 2700X, so we've got token gesture RGB going on there. We also have the Mystic Light is glowing up there in the top right. It's very difficult to see it under my bench lights. However, I'll turn off the light just so you can see what it's like in slightly dimmer lighting. Get ready to be disappointed. So yeah, that's it. That's the Mystic Light. You get, and don't be impressed by this bit over here. That's actually coming from the RAM diagnostic LEDs. That's all you get from the Mystic Light. That bit there, that's it. So yeah, it's a bit of a gimmick in my opinion. I don't like the Mystic Light. If you had that glow all the way around the motherboard, that would be cool. And some of the, like the carbon boards, I think it is, do have the glow all the way around the board, but this one does not. And given that there's no other LEDs anywhere else than the board, it's just, don't bother, just why bother? If you didn't want to do the whole thing, then don't bother with the Mystic Light. Just give us more RGB headers so people can connect up some RGB strips or something like that. Other than that, for the record, apologies for my CPU power cable snaking up the board there. Unbelievably, this case does not have a hole in the top left to feed that through, so I literally had to put it across the board. Such is life. Let's take a look at the BIOS there. So we've got a pretty bog standard MSI BIOS here, complete with some horrendous JPEG compression. So you've got that going for you. The BIOS build on this particular board is December 2018, so they've got a reasonably up-to-date BIOS on it, which is nice. It's good to see BIOS is getting updated routinely on boards now, because it used to be that whenever you bought a board, the chances of it having anything other than the release BIOS were pretty slim. So that's all right. If we quickly switch back to the default easy mode, you get this screen, which gives you all your headline figures, and you can quickly turn on your XMP profiles, which I've done so because we've got 3200 megahertz RAM in this. And you can see your CPU, memory, storage, stuff like that. All the stuff that you're really going to need to fiddle with is actually right here in the easy mode. I prefer to go into advanced just because it's simpler to browse this one with a keyboard. He says, not being able to get onto these side buttons. So let's have a quick whiz through. The settings is all the bog standard stuff in here. You know, this is pretty threadbare these days. There's nothing really that you need to do in here. However, if you want to get pedantic, you can switch off the serial ports on it. You can quickly go into integrated and just set up serial ATA hot swapping and that kind of thing, and any other bits that are relevant. Another thing that some people might find interesting is in power management, you can switch ERP on and off. And this affects whether your USB ports remain powered up while the computer is in off mode. Because obviously, when you shut down your computer, it's still in a very low standby mode, which is S5 suspend. And if you switch on ERP, with ERP disabled, your USB ports will remain active in that state. So if you have a light up mouse, it may remain illuminated and light up your bedroom. If you switch on ERP, then your USB ports will switch off when you shut down the computer. And that means you can't charge your phone from your PC, not that you would anyway, but it does mean that all of your lights and LEDs will definitely switch off while your computer is off. So that's a handy little setting that a lot of people don't know about. And also, we've got a nice little SSD secure erase thing in there. At some time, I've got to take a look and see if that's any good. That's about it. The OC menu, I like MSI's overclocking menu here. You can set it in normal or expert mode, and expert mode will just reveal a couple of additional special, niche settings that extreme overclockers will probably be more interested in. However, on just normal mode, you get all the headline stuff that you care about with your ratios, your base clock, memory clock, and you've got your voltages down here as well. So all the common stuff that you're going to want to do modest overclocking is all here on one page, which is also nice. We've also got CPU specifications. It'll tell you more about your CPU, and memory Z as well, where you can check the SPD and the timings of your memory, which is also nice. As you can see, interestingly, the max bandwidth that gets reported from this memory is 2400, but using the extreme memory profiles, you basically factory overclock your RAM up to the advertised 3200 speed. It's a weird situation. I'm not a fan of XMP, but if we've got it, we'll switch it on. However, do bear in mind that if you get instability, try switching off the XMP because it can cause issues. So yeah, that's that. MFlash, that's for your BIOS update. I have already had a look at this. It does not have an internet BIOS update feature, which makes me sad. I want to see MSI implement that because other brands can do it, but MSI boards can't. You have to update from a flash drive. So it would be nice because when you have internet update, you don't have to hunt down the correct BIOS. You just plug in an Ethernet cable, tell it to update, and it will automatically go out to the MSI server and find you your BIOS update. And that just takes some of the stress out of it. So that's that. Let's head back to the start. Then you've got overclocking profiles over here, so you can save your overclocking profiles if you find a particular setup that works. The hardware monitor, I took a closer look at this hardware monitor in my Z390A Pro review, so check that out for more details on this one. But the long and the short of it is you've got your 6 fan headers up here. You can set all of them into DC or PWM mode, and you can tie them all to a CPU system, MOSFETs, that's CPU vCore, or PCH as your temperature source. So you can, for example, your system 3 and 4 fans that might be the front fans on your computer, you can tie those to the PCH, that's the chipset. You can tie those to the PCH, so when that heats up, your front fans ramp up and things like that. It's quite a niche kind of setup. Generally speaking, if you tie those all to your CPU, you'll be fine. That's what I would recommend doing. And then, as I say, you've got a couple of other things, heuristics, that kind of thing. Check my other review on the Z390A Pro for more details. And then you can drag these icons up the top here around to change your boot order, or you can drill into settings and do it from here as well. So that's fine. Right, past that, I think we're all done. So closing words on the motherboard. It's not a particularly interesting board, but by the same token, I've got no serious complaints with it either. The Intel equivalent of this, which was the Z390A Pro, has a lot of weird utility on it, where I looked at it and I was just like, okay, I guess. I'm not sure why that's there or who would really need this. Whereas this one is definitely more geared toward a gamer, and it has what the gamer is going to care about more, which is, for example, 2 M2 slots rather than having an NGFF slot for Wi-Fi. You know, if you're going to put Wi-Fi, you have a Wi-Fi card like this one does. So yeah, that's about it really. The RGB is really token gesture. I don't know why they even bothered putting I don't know why they even bothered putting the Mystic Light on it. But there it is. There's nothing wrong with this board. It's reasonably good value for money, but the Gigabyte board that is slightly more expensive by about 4 or 5 quid is better value for money. So personally, I would buy the Gigabyte, but if you already have one of these, you won't be disappointed with it. It'll do you proud. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.